Welcome to this Women in Safety podcast. This is a show that provides a supportive space for women in safety careers. We break down the barriers and provide opportunities for growth. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified of new episodes and join us. Here's your Women in Safety podcast host, Tamara Paris.
So hi, and welcome back to another Women in Safety. We're rounding up our series that we were doing with Kathy Seabrook on ESG, and we're going to dive into talking about, are you future fit? So Kathy, let's open it up. And I wanted to kind of get my head around one thing that's really I'm bumping up against is when I'm looking at doing ESG and everything, what does the company need from me as an EH&S professional? Like, what do they need me to be doing?
I think that's a great question, and I'm very excited that this is the opportunity to kind of make this all real and relevant, and to us, right, as safety and health professionals. So when we think about what we do, we've been talking about ESG, environmental, social, and governance for the past two sessions, and we've unpacked all of that. It's really okay. We're in our companies. You know, what do our companies need of us? What do we need to do? And that's what I'm hoping we're going to talk about today, right? So I want to kind of unpack this and break it down. So we've identified the premise, and the premise is of value. Right? We've gone from the concept of your employees, your workers are not just a cost, but they actually provide value to your company. So if we're all in agreement on that, we're all getting that. And your companies have started to understand that as we've come through a major infectious disease incident with COVID, that true identification and understanding of who and what and where our workers need to work, and who is considered the workers that absolutely are essential to be in person versus ones that can work remotely. So that whole construct of our work, our workplace, and who workers are has all been turned on its head. So with that, if we accept the premise that people are at the core of every thriving business, of any business really, but specifically a thriving business that you are working in, their contribution and their ability to contribute really is influenced by their health, their safety, and their well-being. So if we believe that premise, and if we understand the concept of human capital, or people working in companies, and what value do they create, what capital is just wealth, and that's just what the business world, the investment community, that's what capitalism, that's fundamental, right? Human capital, as well as produced capital and manufactured intellectual capital. And it's always been around financial capital. So we're broadening this out to non-traditional capital. So natural capital, which is the environment, which many of us also have that hat, as well as the people side, or the human capital. So if we believe this and this premise, then this concept of where do we fit in? Where does this become real and relevant? I today just really want to identify just a couple things that if we remember, the most important thing is that you don't have to do anything new. I know, don't fall off your chairs. But the concept of identifying, of assessing, of monitoring, of measuring, and managing ESG impacts or risks is what we do, but we just call it EH&S, environmental health and safety, or if you're just safety and health, and occupational health and safety. So that's what we're going to have a chance to talk about. And it starts with us. And what we've always done is our leadership role in environmental health and safety. So our leadership role in managing safety in the organization. And we do that by understanding the business environment in which we're operating. We understand where our leaders are. We understand alignment on languaging that we've been talking about in the past two sessions, and then really understanding this integrated perspective that we right now, I mean, safety and health management systems, risk-based approach, that's what we've been doing. That's what we do for a living. Well, that's what we're looking at in terms of impacts. So risks, ESG impacts, and the dependencies. And we'll hopefully unpack that a little bit more. But it's really important that we continue to do what we do best, which is identify risks, impacts, and we're going to talk about dependencies and how are they managed in your organization? Because at the end of the day, the stakeholders we've been talking about, whether they're customers, whether they're suppliers, whether they're shareholders or investors, whether the workers in the organization, they are all looking to make good, sound decisions. Customers deciding to do business with your companies, suppliers deciding to provide your company with, could be contract workers, could be raw materials, component parts. They could actually be outsourced to do some of your facilities management, for example, construction work, etc. So if we're thinking about what our companies need from us, they need us to be leaders. They need us to be agents of change. They need us to continue to do what we do best, which is identify impacts, risks, dependencies, and help the company manage them. So if we kind of pull all that together with an integrated approach, so business is business, safety, health, and environmental management, other aspects of governance. So how is that done? What are the roles and responsibilities of the people like us for health and safety? It's the operational side of the house that we've really come to understand are accountable, and they're the ones that have the authority to make decisions. And that is a concept of governance. Crisis management, that's governance too. So I think that's a good place for us to just begin to start tomorrow on, what does our company need from us? And first and foremost, leadership and understanding, because we now, hopefully through these 3 sessions at the end, each one of you all are going to understand a little bit more about ESG and that intersectionality between that and safety and health and environmental.
I guess when you're speaking and you're sharing this and we talk about leadership, and leadership is about having influence. And one of the places in an organization that you get to have influence is at the decision-making table. And I think a lot of us in health and safety really struggle to understand how can we navigate through to that C-suite decision-making table. So can you share some of your insights about getting there?
So I'm hoping tomorrow, because I think that's just the best question. And frankly, it's the challenge to each one of you out there. We're at the table and we don't even know it. And hopefully along the way, you've identified and you're starting to understand that everything that we do relative to safety and health and environmental management, which is, it's our wheelhouse, right? Our companies are looking for us to help them with the people side. So the safety and health side of the social side of sustainability and ESG impacts. And at the end of the day, the other piece to this is us not just sitting at the table, but influencing, as you had suggested tomorrow, influencing some of those business decision makers. So let's give you an example. The company is deciding to acquire a new operation. Maybe it's in India, maybe it's in Mexico, maybe it's in Texas. And in order to do that, they need to create debt. And in order to create debt, that means they need to borrow, because debt is about borrowing. So they need capital or wealth in order to purchase and acquire that particular company. So kind of fast forwarding, in order to determine whether that's a good investment, think about the stakeholders. Internally, you're thinking about your CEO, because this is a big decision. You're thinking your boards of directors, because they are either perhaps deciding that this is going to be a new product or service, so they're expanding. So that means it also is going to influence the customer. So customer's decision maker. But you're also going to have have employees, no matter where that is in the world. So there will need to be decisions on, Is there access to competent people? Is there that human capital that's actually available for that merger and acquisition? And then the last piece of that is the investment community. And honestly, as we've been talking all along, it's the investment community that has really been doing the question asking, and it's only getting more. They want to know, if they're going to lend you that money, are you a well-managed company? Are you going to be able to have the people that are going to be able to manufacture the product or provide the service in that particular either country or region of the world, whether it's US based, Canadian based, UK based, Australian based, Venezuelan based. And so that concept of influence is this. Somebody in the legal department or somebody in operations at that decision-making table looks at you and says, I know there's some like hazardous waste, or there's, methyl ethyl death. I mean, there's something to do with these operations, but we really don't understand what those risks are and what the impact might be to the environment, the impact of that community to our company, i.e., are they going to accept our company in that particular community, or whether it's a manufacturing site or a distribution site. And there's our opportunity. We might not be making the final decision, but we're going to be influencing, because we're going to talk about the toxicity of methyl ethyl death. We're going to talk about the controls we need to have in place for methyl ethyl death. And we are also going to run the numbers to help our business leaders understand what it means to bring up, from a compliance perspective, that particular operation. We're also going to make sure that there's some due diligence that is done so we can make sure those numbers are right. And thus creates the value of safety and health of our people wherever they are working in the world. And at the end of the day, this is where we shine. Right. And this is where we're going to be asked. So doesn't it make much more sense to be much more proactive and build some bridges right now here in the real world, so you are able to influence our operational side of the house, our legal side of the house, who are really interested in that compliance, right? And procurement, right? Our procurement departments, they need to really understand, are they going to be able to get the raw materials, the people, all the details of procurement that they might need. So a great question, and absolutely, we have such a role to play. And I just have to poke everybody out there, because sometimes we don't even know it.
Yeah, let's break this down a little bit more.
Sure.
Because now that you're talking a little bit, I'm starting to imagine in my head, oh, okay, so for example, if we were doing an acquisition, going out and doing the research, right? Doing that kind of assessment, that needs assessment that we usually do, in order to look at what are we eliminating, what are we mitigating exactly in our own workplace, level that up and learn what do you need to be aware of in the environment we're going to be working on in, so that then when you're at that meeting, right, you already can forecast what are the questions people are going to be asking you. Am I getting it?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I didn't know if there was a question in that. So yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Tamara, to your point, right? To your comment, it's this concept of due diligence, which is what we do now.
Yes, so, it is. Yeah. Forecasting.
Yeah.
Like you do your yearly, look at what could be coming at us from trends of previous years. Right. And you do a forecasting of what do we need to prepare for.
So you're making 2 points. One, forecasting, so looking outwardly, and two, the due diligence. And the due diligence is if you're going to purchase a company, you're taking a look at, what are the existing liability issues? What are the existing issues around in our case, safety and health, potential environmental impacts. But you're also, what I'm hearing you say is you're also talking about, how do we do some forward thinking? And interesting, just to connect some dots, it's current state and what is the future state, right? And this concept of future state really is about what is the purpose of the company. And I think I've shared along the way, we've been talking about, the true north and true north test.
Yes.
And that truly is that future state that we're looking to, where people and their health, safety, and well-being, the environment, where they're actually valued. We're talking about this is value versus cost, right? Value, and that's reflected in this business decision making. The example I just gave, and at the end of the day, whether it's in due diligence or when operations are actually in place and these impacts and these risks and dependencies are actually being managed well, that is a reflection of true corporate performance. It's not just financial performance, as we played out. We talked about materiality and what's reported in terms of a potential material risks or impacts for a company, but this actually expands this out. So it's a great thought and a great question, and it kind of takes us to where we actually need to be, because right now, all that's being measured is stuff, activity. So, how many incidents have you had? What we call in our world, right, all the lagging indicators performance. Now, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which we've talked about in the past, that is transitioning to the International Sustainability Standards Board. They have identified those lagging indicators that need to be reported, and those are for investors. But also, they're asking for a management system. So, so thumbs up, thumbs down. You have a management system, or you don't, to manage your risks. Well, that's an activity, and it doesn't tell you what the delta is. It doesn't tell you what the change is, and that's what all of the stakeholders, not just the investors and the shareholders, which could be the same. It's not just them, it's everyone is looking, if this is your current state, what is your future state, and how are you getting there, and what are your milestones along the way? And that's what we want to know. We don't just want to know how many incidents, because that doesn't help us understand your company. Because honestly, it could go both ways. It could mean a really bad year with some issues that, you had some serious problems in a year. But the company isn't necessarily completely not well managed. But there are certain incidents that were not taken into account. We call them the serious injury and fatality potential, and perhaps it wasn't identified. And then there was a actual serious and or fatality incident that actually happened. So investors in particular, but our business leaders are really, because it's hyper focused on them now, because the investors, because that's their, in particular, that's if they're publicly traded or they're creating debt, if they're not publicly traded, but the investors are really looking hard at the details and that delta, right? What's the change in managing these impacts?
And I'm going to poke this a little bit more, because I know that my peers and I were very good at the technical stuff and making sure everything is compliant, because there's like legislation and stuff that you can follow and make sure that you're getting what you need done. But I think that we come to a time also that you've got to think a little bit bigger. I was talking to somebody and they were coming over to North America, and they're from Europe. And so they brought over all their systems and all that technical stuff, and they put it in, and it didn't work, right? And it's because there's a culture difference in the people. So I am, now correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm not all in on the boat, but ESG also incorporates that social part of the people, doesn't it? And understanding that.
So we, and the people side, and I just call the people side of sustainability, people side of ESG, we are the social side. And when we talk about social, what it means in context is relationships. So it's your relationship with your supplier, it's your relationship with your employees, it's your relationship with your customer, it's your relationship with the government regulators, right? Policymakers in health and safety, in environmental management, but also in the financial markets. In the United States, it's the Securities and Exchange Commission, and around the world, the EU, for example, has new legislation that's coming out, and it's not voluntary, it's mandatory, and that is the big shift. Now, there's a lot of loopholes, there's a lot of still things to be worked out. In the United States, for example, it's proposed, so there's going to still be a lot of horse trading going on, but there is movement on
Mhm.
what companies should actually be reporting on. And I guess I just want to share with all of my colleagues, with you, and everybody out there, this isn't just about reporting and disclosure.
Yeah.
Really, it's about decision making for the company and making the company. And what you've said, in culture, right? Culture, business culture, country culture. And so I always talk about, and this is the second piece, so leadership, alignment, and looking at purpose, right? So that's that whole first bucket, and that culture and that purpose. And that purpose is that true north that we've just talked about, but it's all together. So when you've got thinking about culture, purpose, you're thinking about strategy, you're thinking about your processes,
Mhm.
and you're thinking about alignment, building bridges, you're looking at internal stakeholders, you're looking at external stakeholders. That's that S that you've highlighted. That's all in there on the
Mhm.
S side. And honestly, when you think about ESG, so environment, social, which we just unpacked, and governance is it's like an umbrella for all of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Think about managing risks. We have to understand that the roles and the responsibilities, the hierarchy, the strategy, the action plans and action planning process, which includes workers, right? Includes your employees at all levels in the organization. That is good governance. The
Mhm.
ability to be able to make good decisions. That's good governance, and having checks and balances on those decisions. So all of it, I mean, just your question just kind of really blows it wide open to really understand again that interconnectivity
Mhm.
of E, S, and G. And we now understand that the safety and health part is under social because it's about people and relationships, because it's employees or workers. And the E, well, they got the whole big E, and that's the environmental side. So yeah, no, great question.
Now, one thing that I'd like to kind of open up is like we talked about being the best EHS professional that we can be. So can you help us understand, help share with the audience, what are the things that we need to consider in order to achieve that? Because everybody has a different definition of what the best is, right?
Yeah, I'm not having that debate. I'm just going to say, best, good, whatever you want, but to be at the top of your game. You alluded to this in the very beginning, Tamara, that, we as safety professionals, I mean, our base is that we are good technically. Some of us have certifications, some of us have gone through certificate programs, we've done training and education. So we are competent to our jobs, but it's not enough. Because if we don't know context and we don't know how to apply that incredible, great knowledge that our company needs, and we don't have the relationships, right? That social side, we don't have the relationships internally, we are not going to create allies to help us move our agenda, within the context of ESG, or to move ESG in the context of EHS, because it can cut both ways. And then really understanding, translating this to roadmaps, right? So to be able to understand that context or the business environment in which we're operating, which we've been talking all about, and all the stakeholders and really the business globally that is moving in this direction of ESG, right? And all the motivations, incentives for companies and all the stakeholders that are moving it's not going away. And just, FYI, I think this is really important. So S&P Market Intelligence, which is a ratings agency, they acquired the rating agency for the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And mind you, that is in the US. However, global companies around the world are listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So S&P Global, as a rating agency, has really done some deep dives to try to get a sense of, okay, I'm thinking about my true north, right? So, okay, so true corporate performance. Well, show me the money. What are the returns on the investments for companies that are actually investors that are investing in what they call ESG funds, so companies that are actually identifying, assessing, managing, monitoring, and continually improving, if you will, their ESG impacts and really becoming more well managed. Are they outperforming? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to read the numbers. It's from December 31st of 2020 until May 17th of 2021. S&P Global Market Intelligence basically looked at the numbers, and what they said, or what was uncovered, was that in this ETF exchanges, so again, these funds that are associated with investing in ESG companies and organizations, it's about 250 million assets under management, 11% to 29.5% return on investment. They outperformed the S&P 500, and because the S&P, so 11% to 29.5%, and the S&P was averaging 10.9%. So what does this mean? So early days, this is not mainstreamed across all investors, but these are specifically with ESG funded funds that investors are investing in, and venture capitalists too that are investing in companies are starting to demonstrate that they are outperforming the S&P 500. So that's a motivation, right, for a company to start managing the risk so they can be part of, for example, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So they can be part of the companies that are going to be considered a good risk for those investors to invest in.
Now we're diving into more business language and into understanding like how we have to think in a business way, which I'll be upfront with you. It's a struggle sometimes when we're throwing numbers around and getting into discussions like this. I'll be transparent with my audience. If you're a little bit lost too, that's okay, because we're in a learning curve right now, so that's fine. So what I did want to ask though, because Kathy, you talked about this before, was something about business alignment. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to be upfront that like some people who are listening, I don't really know what that is or how to do this. So can you kind of guide us through that?
Absolutely. And I'm just going to tell you, I've been in your shoes. I mean, it's like alphabet soup, right? And all these terms, oh, is this decision useful? It's like, what? And it's like, well, yeah, that's decision making. That's good information for good decision making. But, so all the terminology and all my colleagues that I speak to that, I mean, mind you, I've been in this space for like now 12 years. And so it's a journey. So if you're just starting, I just want to make sure that it's tomorrow's point. It's like, we all got to start somewhere, right? So your current state is wherever your current state is. And so this is about your journey as well. So doing some homework. So your first step here is to go and find out more about your company. Or if you're a consultant, go look and figure out the client that's your best client or whatever. Looking at your client and going online, read the report from the CEO in their annual financial report, no matter where they are in the world. Every company, in order to their license to do business, they have to report on their financials. And in that, you will find, and I want to say it was like 60% now of companies, and again, I apologize for just the US, but this is a figure, I literally just read this today, are actually reported in their first quarter of their earnings ESG impacts. So it's really important that we start to unpack and start to understand our own company. So read in that annual report, start understanding what is considered material. If your company also publishes a sustainability report or a corporate responsibility report, go read that, and literally, because you can do it all online, Google safety and health. It'll take you right there on their online, because it's all searchable, and you can start to see what companies are measuring. And what you're going to see is lagging indicators of performance, because that's what the investors are asking for right now, because they frankly don't know. And that's the space I'm working in to try to get better metrics. But you will see some really well-run companies start to talk about risk assessment, and they'll start to talk about their safety and health management systems. And this is where we shine. This is not new to us. This whole concept of identifying hazards and risks, that's what we do. We do that in our sleep. And this is what our companies are being asked for by these external stakeholders. And this is why we now have an opportunity to kind of, step up to the table. So when I talk about alignment, that's alignment. Your company's purpose, what your company is looking at, that's important to them. What is material? We've talked about that earlier, but what's material to them? So if it's material, it means they're managing it, whatever that particular risk or impact is. And so for us, the alignment is material impacts in some companies. I mean, chemical companies are a good example, oil and gas companies are a good example. Construction, they've identified, many of them have identified the health and safety of their employees as material. So therefore, if they've said that, the investment community, your customers, your suppliers are all looking at that. And I do have to be really honest to your point, Tamara. I was on a recent panel with a head of global environmental health and safety for the company in which that person works. And he basically said, well, investors aren't important to me. And I said, well, it's really about alignment. And they may not be important to you, but I'm pretty sure that they're important to your chief financial officer, your boards of directors, your CEO, because your CEO reports to the board of directors. And investors can decide whether or not your company is going to be sustainable over time. I mean, they're going to determine whether they're going to invest. And it's just capitalism. It just is what it is. So when I talk about alignment, this is why we don't need to know the deep dives. We don't need to know the details of ESG, but what we need to know is where we are aligned and we're in there. So we can help our companies and we can leverage ESG. And to me, this is our sweet spot. We can actually leverage ESG for the initiatives we have in safety and health that we want to move forward, because we're aligning it with our business's strategies. So if it's important to the business, then your initiatives are actually going to be moved forward. And we can't do this unless we're bridge building, and which I think is something that's so important that we do. We do this in safety all the time. I mean, if you're in safety, you can talk to everybody in the company, right? We have to. You might be talking to the CEO who's getting ready to do some travel to a country that might have some security issues. And so you might be part of briefing that person, right? Or they may have there might be health issues. And so they need some immunizations if they're going. So we're used to having these kinds of conversations from a safety and health perspective. And that's really helps us bode well for the bridge building to continue. But I want to just highlight that there's just some non-traditional internal groups, such as investor relations.
Mm-hmm.
We typically don't ever get involved in, but this is an opportunity, and you can do it informally. And I would share with you that one of my colleagues, who's the head of safety and health for their supply chains globally, they were talking about the fact that the analysts had actually asked about the supply chain and the safety and health in the supply chain, specifically thinking about fire and exits and emergency procedures and that kind of thing in various parts of the world. And so that particular safety and health professional was called before the analyst community. And this is starting to happen. And so if we don't know, then we can't contribute. And so that's why it's so important for us to reach way high in the business to understand the context, so we can use that information to leverage what we need to accomplish on a daily basis.
And I want to kind of break this open a little bit more.
Sure.
And the reason for that is exactly to your point, is that often our health and safety professionals do not get allies or integrate themselves into that world of the stakeholders, the CEOs, etc. Right? And I think that we need to get past that. If it's uncomfortable to you, or you think it's not important, whatever is maybe holding you back, I would encourage to push through that, because then you could be doing your homework. You talk about doing homework, and in my opinion, would these people not be wonderful knowledge to gather knowledge and understand what you need to come prepared with?
And also, they can be giving the answers, right? They can be asking the right
Yeah,
questions,
yeah,
right?
because I was talking to somebody when I was working somewhere, and I was trying to figure out some calculations, right, for sick days and all this. And the person turned around to me and they said, "Why don't you just go up and ask the claims department? They do all of that already. Why are you trying to figure this all out?" And I was like, "Oh, I never thought about asking the claims department about that." And he said, he just shook his head. He goes, "That's what's wrong with you guys. Like, you always rework things. Like, you don't go and look like who else might be doing this, because they have a wealth of data that could be helping you, you know?"
Oh my gosh, you were so spot on. And you know what? It's good to call us out.
Yeah.
It's good to call us out. Human resources is another entity that we just really don't make good use of. And I think in the area of training and development, learning management systems, right?
Yeah.
It's like, why are we creating this when the company already has training and they already keep documents? Why do we in safety and health, let's integrate into, what HR or training and development is already doing.
CFOs want to talk to people. It's so funny. It's like, I was at a company party and was talking to different people, and there was a CFO, and he was like sitting there basically by himself, right? Because the accounting, nobody really thought to talk to him. And so I felt bad, and I sat down and talked to him, and he was asking me questions, and he wanted to know, and he was interested. Right. And it occurred to me, wait a minute here. This guy has the money. Like, this would be the best person in the organization to pick their brain. So then we started going out for coffee and talking and stuff. And I learned so much about how to position things more in a business way to get heard, because that was his language. And he was just so happy to have somebody that wanted to be talking to him. And so one of the things we talked about was allies and mentors. And in a way, like, he started out as a mentor, and as he began to understand my struggles in what I was doing, started to become a champion.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
and
yeah,
so that's another area I wanted to kind of get into, was allies, mentors, and champions. Can you give some tidbits about how to get those?
So, okay, my favorite thing to do. Yes, I can. And I'll actually give you like boots on the ground too. But I just want to say, Tamara, this is what I'm talking about, bridge building. Just exactly what you've talked about. So for me, here's what I do. I just, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether if I'm actually working with a client, I outline, maybe 6, 7 people I want to speak with, and I, send them an email or text, and I say, do you have 30 minutes? I'd like to get to know a little bit more about what you do, to understand its relevance to safety and health, or whatever I'm working on in an organization. And I was going to say 9 times out of 10, but no, I don't think I've ever had anyone say no. And when you're talking 30 minutes, sometimes it's just, you can say 20 minutes, but saying hello and sitting down, whatever, it's usually 30 minutes and it flies. But just coming with like 1 or 2 questions, tell me about what you do. How do you see safety and health integrating in your particular area? I mean, get them to do some heavy lifting. I am telling you, that's how it works. And then just exactly the story you just shared, it's really how it sort of evolves, if you will. Right. So here this person you just had a conversation with, because there was nobody talking to them, that evolved, right, to conversation, mentorship, and to be a champion. And so I always say, figure out the people of power. And it's not just people that are in the hierarchy of power, but it's informal power. So you might have a worker that everybody follows. If that woman says, we're going to all turn right, everybody goes right. Or you go left, depending on what they say. And it's really important to get their perspective, because at the end of the day, when you're having these conversations, the key is there's only one of us. I mean, in some of our, companies, you might have maybe 3, if you're lucky, 5 people on corporate staff, and typically it's 2. And so you really need to get down in the operational side of the company, the functional side of the company, to find these allies, as you're talking about. That's my word too. And they're people at all levels of the organization that will help you move whatever it is, your agenda forward. So we've been talking about ESG, but in terms of our safety and health, I mean, we need to do this. This is the basic principles I know of organizational development, but it's key for any kind of change, because if you don't get down into the organization, I mean, we're talking the foreman level, supervisor, superintendent level, that no matter how much the CEO is saying, yes, we're going to do this, and yes, we're going to manage our risks, and yes, we're going to look at ESG. When it gets down to the supervisor, the foreman level, if their incentives and motivations are not in that area, it's never going to happen. And that typically is where the breakdown always occurs there. And when the employee is actually having to go, all right, I can manufacture this product, I can provide this service, I can be out in that construction site, or I can do it safely, right? And the deal is we want them to integrate it. And that's why integration is that other piece that is just so important. So people. It's all about the social relationships, and what you just described are part of the social relationships in an organization. And it's the only way that you're going to get sustainable change, or change that is sustainable over time.
Yeah. And I think as we move forward and things are changing in the way we're doing business and the way we're living, our modern society has already, just over the last few years, taken us light years to thinking in a different way,
Yes.
right? I would encourage, like, you thinking about how do you get to have those conversations with those executives, with those chief officers, as well as with the stakeholders. That CFO introduced me to investors and stuff, because I was somebody that they felt comfortable with. So then when there were new people, he'd be like, oh, come on, let me introduce you, right? So there's that also, like, that's a pathway into, you're saying, how do I meet the investors? Well, if you get an ally like the chief financial officer, which the investors always want to talk to him, right? That's one of the hot spots, is that person they do want to talk to. They will then introduce you to people. And then drilling down to the organizational level, right? As you were saying, you want to find that person that has influence of what are the values and what are our normative behaviors in this organization, right? And then that will kind of really help you understand, what will people buy into and what are people going to say, yeah, not going to do it. And then you can pivot, right, to what you need to be doing to get people's buy-in. Now, as like every single generation that has come through, be it the baby boomers with their parents, be it myself, I'm a Y with the baby boomers, the millenniums coming in, there's always been like a clash in generations, right? And so how can you help our EH&S professionals understand more is going to be coming in the world of technology, right? With the next generation, how can they be connecting and integrating with those individuals?
But it's this concept of a VUCA world where it's, the world is volatile, the world is very uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. Well, that's where we are. And one of the ways to try or attempt to harness that,
okay, yeah,
is to no avail, to be honest, because it's continuing to change, but is to use technology. And companies are already doing that. And it's not just having a technology tool that's going to help you manage the data. It's that. But frankly, there's a lot of companies out there right now that are doing that.
I was talking to UPS, and they are using the Oculus. They are using the Oculus for their training. for
Mhm.
all their health and safety training, for helping to drive, but even for having meetings, virtual meetings where they can be more seeing people. So that was very interesting. Like when I talked to that person, I was like, wow, really? I'd love to work there. Go into VR land. But that woke me up that the world is changing very fast. And sometimes I kind of feel like we're being left behind, Kathy, that we're
Well,
not innovative enough
who's we?
sometimes.
Who's we?
Well, me,
Oh, are you? I thought you're thinking about safety and health professionals.
well,
Because safety
some
and
of
health
us, yeah.
professionals, yeah, safety and health professionals, I think it depends on who you are. So I would never want to lump everybody
No.
together. I know I'm pretty technology forward. And a lot of my colleagues that I work with are very technology forward. So using things as you've described, like the Oculus with UPS, but also really kind of working within their organizations to understand, AI and how is the organization embracing it, and from our perspective, what are the safety and health implications? And robotics have been around forever, especially in the automotive industry. But that was an example. So that interface of technology, and especially with AI not starting, but AI making decisions.
Mhm.
Right. And how do we build in, like we've been talking about ESG decision making, how do we build that in? Because that, I think, is what's evolving. It'd be interesting to see where that is in 10 years. But
Yeah.
yeah, if all of you folks out there, I mean, if you haven't embraced technology, you're in trouble. I mean, you are. I mean, at the end of the day, and I smile because even folks, navigating Teams and Zoom, some people
Mhm.
still have a hard time, but you got to be able to do it.
But Teams and Zoom is that's old hat now, really.
Yeah, and the sad
Right?
news is there's still people that have a hard time with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a good example. And it is old news, but I think when we talk about technology, the way in which we do work, the way work is going to actually be reworked for the future. There's that piece, but there's also that human side, and that ability to let go and let technology do its work, take that information, and then make decisions that really need to be human. And I think that that's a big transition for people of all ages, honestly.
So I know we're at the end of our time, but I
We are.
wanted to, yeah, we are. It goes
Oh,
by
darn it.
fast. Can you share with us, like, what are you envisioning for the future of ESG and health and safety?
Oh, yeah, I can absolutely do that. So right now we're talking about risk. That's what we know, right? But risks are, what is a company? What is their risk on the environment? What is their risk on people? So looking at emissions, looking at air, water, hazardous waste, permitting, all those kinds of things that we measure. Looking at safety and health, we're reporting out, we're measuring how many incidents you have, how many fatalities, lost time cases, etc. What we're going to be looking at, and it's not going to be that much longer. The world is evolving so darn fast. Right at this second, it's not happening. But there is so much happening in this world that, I'm involved in the Capitals Coalition. I co-chair the Human Capital and Occupational Health and Safety. And we are working on research. We're working on examples that demonstrate value of an ergonomic intervention in a company. So kind of the financial valuation, so that can actually be part of the accounting process in financial accounting. And so things are moving on. This is the kind of thing, these non-traditional, non-financial direct interventions that are going to be valued in different ways. And that takes us back to True North. And this concept, it's not just about the risk of the company on the environment, on people, but it's about dependency. So what is the impact that climate risk is going to have on the company? And I want you to think about droughts. I want you to think about weather catastrophic scenarios where, infrastructure is lost, electricity, gas, etc. And you have a contingency whereby your plant or your operations cannot operate. Infectious disease like COVID, which this has just begun. I mean, this will continue to happen. It's just going to be how fast will we be able to do vaccines and things like that. But the world in which we live in, weather conditions and emissions from a climate risk perspective, causing occupational cancers, causing things such as asthma, all of those things. So it's the environment impacting the company. And then what does that mean for that company? Can they operate without those people? And we just saw that in the pandemic. No. And then also looking, so you can see the intersectionality between the environment and people. So it's all together, that concept of integration, that is going to continue to move forward. And everything we've been talking about today, right now, to right this very second, is been siloed. Right now, when we're talking about human capital and the governments, the US government, the European governments, they're focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, diversity, equity, and inclusion in and of itself, if people are not safe, healthy, and have a sense of well-being, you can't silo these things out. They are all interconnected, right? And it's important that they are. It's important that we have a diverse workforce. It's important that we have diversity of thought, creating innovation, problem solving. It's good for companies. It's important for companies, and they're really starting to recognize that. But, it's climate risk and diversity, equity, and inclusion right now. But watch this space, because the investors are really starting to look at human capital, and that'll be next. So, I have my crystal ball. I'm always connecting the dots into the future, and human capital is the future. And our ability as safety and health professionals to be able to look at those ergonomic interventions we're doing and be able to translate that for our business to what is value. When I talk about value, I'm talking about wealth and what that creates for the company. That puts us in a whole different place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Kathy Seabrook from Global Solutions, right? And you can connect with you on LinkedIn, right?
Absolutely. Just find me on Global Solutions Inc. There you can either do that or just find me, Kathy Seabrook. Either way, I'd love to have a conversation with anybody out there that wants to be poked as to where we're going. I love it. And Tamara, I have so appreciated my conversations with you. This has been amazing. I really appreciate it.
No, this has been fun. Thank you so much for joining us and giving your time.